seconds. All right, there we go. I'm dropping the link right now into the chat. Hang on a second. All right, yeah, that's the live link on YouTube. And as always, I'm going to drop that into the syllabus on Canvas once we get going. Okay, so Rose, Abrar, I'm not sure who's going first, or I posted. Didn't I post a video of Margaret talking about some of the stuff? I think I posted that on the syllabus, didn't I? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So
Gender mag, right?
yeah. So I did. So Rose and Abrar, I did give them. Posted a video of Margaret Burnett doing. Talking about it to lay a little foundation. So everybody should have watched it conceptually. And so there's a little bit of background. Okay, all yours.
Okay, well, I will start. My name is Abrar Fallatah, and today we'll be presenting about how gender inclusion shape our technology design. That's the title of the talk. So a little about me. I am a PhD student here at Oregon State University. I got my master's from DePaul University in Chicago in human-computer interaction, and then now I'm doing human-computer/human-robots interaction. And I work with Margaret Burnett, whom supposedly you just watched her video talking about gender mag. Rose, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you still hear me? I switched mics.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it's a little more. It seems a little quieter, maybe, Rose.
I will bring it slightly closer to my face.
Yeah, that helped. Yeah, that's better. Awesome.
All right. So I'm Rose Garcia. I'm an undergrad student. This is my senior year, and my major is applied computer science for human-computer interaction. And I also work with Dr. Margaret Burnett, and my kind of focus is on teaching gender inclusivity in the classroom.
Okay, so first question that someone will ask, how is this relevant to computer science, right? And my answer is very much. This is definitely important and relevant to our field because we are the ones who are responsible for building those technologies. And actually, most of those gender bias bugs or issues that comes into technology comes because of our implicit or environmental background. So someone would be like, okay, so now maybe kind of Sora, Abrar, you can convince me that I should pay attention to this gender bias thingy, but then how much time should I spend on it? And I'm like, you really need to spend the time on it because in a few minutes I will just explain to you all the bad things that will happen to you if you didn't do it, and hopefully I will convince you, right? So as I just said, these gender bias bugs we can see them in technology, in the technology that computer scientists create, and also in the tools that they use, such as the IDEs. Now, this is really important because the payoff that people will face when they're using those gender biases is that cognitive task, right? You want to do something, let's say, for example, you want to place an order over Uber Eats, right? And then the cognitive task, the load it takes you and the effort it takes you just to place a simple food order is too much. And that's why it is important if you want to build a high quality interface. Now, who's typically excluded from these technologies, right? Now, generally, these are the overall people that technology exclude, right? Now, for example, we can, in our talk today, we will be focusing on women, but there are lots of other researchers who looked at people from low social economic status or people from low literature background. I also want to highlight the fact that all of these aspects also comes into some what we call intersectionality, which means that you can be both woman and maybe English is your second language, right? It's not your first language. So we're highly motivated by gender bias in technology, not only because of the social justice aspect, but also because it increases the quality of the user interfaces, and also it increases money, right? So money perspective, if you want to make money, you really want to have everyone. So this is an example of like what in HCI most professional HCIs use curb cuts as an example of why people should care, right? Years ago, we used to have this like, how can we help people on the wheelchairs? And it's like, okay, we can create curb cuts, right? And then we will ease their mobility. And now we can see that curb cuts are helpful for people on walkers, people who have heavy luggage to move from one place to another, bicycles, and even people pushing babies. Now, um, this is an example of how addressing an underserved population or an underserved group of people actually can help and benefit everyone. Now, curb cuts are services. Let's talk a little bit more and see if that aspect of designing can, for a subgroup, help others from a product perspective. Now, the founder of OXO, this story is actually really cool because the founder of OXO was like, okay, babe, why are you like facing so many difficulties like using the peeler? It's just a peeler, right? She's like, well, I have arthritis and no one look at that issue. And then they founded this company that allows people to have kitchen stuff that helps people with arthritis. And now they started gaining a lot of money simply because what they created it as just a tool to help uh, people with joint problems is now helpful for a wide variety, such as home cooks, right? Elderly, people who are juggling multitasking, and even kids. Now, here in this video, and hopefully this will work, finger crossed.
Yeah, let's hope.
My name is Havan Gurma. I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights Advocates.
So this is a video on YouTube, and I want you to pay attention to the captions and the video itself. I'm not going to play all of it, but just a part of it.
And we work to end discrimination against individuals with disabilities using high-impact litigation and community education.
She walks with her guide dog in San Francisco.
Part of community education is informing the tech community about things they can do to make technology more accessible for people with disabilities.
She rides an elevator to work.
When you design technologies for the disability community, you do deepen your understanding of what it means to be human.
So here is an example of how descriptive audios can be helpful, right? For someone who might not have any disabilities, it's easy for them just to go to YouTube and play a video. But then for someone with audio impairment, whether if it's a permanent or temporary one, having those audio descriptive will help them see the scene and actually enjoy any media. So all these examples are what we hopefully is enough to indicate to you what we in the HCI community call inclusive design. Now, inclusive design is this whole aspect of how we can design a product, and then we want to include a segment of the population. And here today we will be focusing on women. And then by doing that, we will help people from other with other disabilities. So hopefully now that I motivated you and you're like, okay, now I will create something for a subgroup because it will benefit everyone. Here's what I don't want you to do. Shrink it and pink it. Does anyone know what is shrink it and pink it? And please talk to me. I don't want typing. Someone can like verbally say it to me. What's shrink it and pink it?
I think Margaret talked about that, right? Is that right, guys? In the video that I shared, didn't Margaret talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, she talked about it, and she actually gave this exact example where Dell shrunk on laptops and painted them pink.
And what does so they painted it pink? Was that a bad idea? What happened? Was it good?
Terrible. Offensive.
Because
Because it doubles down on the distinction between genders. It says there has to be a separate product for women rather than making it more inclusive in their primary product.
perfect.
Right. And I
That's
think
well
Margaret,
said.
Margaret, I think also talked about the Bic for her, right? And she did this. It
Yeah.
was hilarious. And Margaret's very funny, but she was like, "Oh, I'm so grateful. I could never sign papers by myself without my husband, but now that I have the Bic for her, I can sign for myself." You know, it was anyway, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it ties back to that same example, right? This whole idea that um, looking at females or women, sorry, looking at women from a perspective that they need a separate product is what made all of these product a huge whether if it's you guys want to call it offensive or from a business perspective failures,
I mean, they
right?
were
So
Abrar. They were pretty much business failures, right? I mean, these were not economic successes, right? People weren't lining up to buy the Bic for her, right?
yeah. For example, for the Dell computer in 2009, when Dell released the computer, they also released a website called Delta, right? And the website promoted not just only the laptop, but then it also gave females the ability to buy computer accessories and advices on how to lose weight and make recipes, right? So that website did not last more than 20 minutes. That's 2009. I'm talking before Twitter. I'm talking
Yeah.
before TikTok. I'm talking before social media has all of this impact. And the website lasted 20 minutes. So, from a business perspective, it is a huge failure. Now, the argument here isn't that if we created pink, they shouldn't be pink. The idea is that pink should be an option. It's not an exclusion criteria. Okay, now from here I'll hand it to Rose, and hopefully she can convince you more about how not to shrink it and pink it.
Yeah. So if we can go to the next little bit on this slide. So nobody is typical. And this is kind of a big concept in inclusive design, is that there's no like average user, typical user. That's a concept that we don't really think about, and we don't want to think about in this type of designing. We don't want to divide people into typical women or typical men. So it's not about dividing, it's about debugging and designing for a large variety instead of just women or just men. So next slide, please. So where do we find these kinds of bugs? Well, pretty much anywhere that you could think of. Open source projects, programming environments, spreadsheets, e-learningware, websites, digital libraries, help systems, robots, mobile apps, and many, many more. There are lots of places where we find these. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to address these problems, because you can find these types of bugs in just about any software. Next, please. So then how are we actually finding these? Well, that's where GenderMag comes in. And if you watched Margaret's video, I'm sure you already know some of this, but the Gender Inclusiveness Magnifier, also known as GenderMag, is a process used to evaluate a tool's inclusiveness. So we kind of focus in on a user who's problem solving with tech. Maybe they're asking questions about how do I do this or should I do that? And by focusing in on what their sort of problem solving process with the technology is, we can find places where they might struggle to use the technology, where they might run into bugs. And so GenderMag has 3 personas and 5 cognitive facets. So the 3 personas are Abby, Pat, and Tim, which are shown on the right side of the screen. And we'll get into them a little bit more, as well as we'll talk about the 5 facets in some of the later slides. But GenderMag as a whole is a gender-specialized cognitive walkthrough that embeds facets and personas into a process. So what this means is we're stepping into the shoes of the persona to see what the software looks like from their perspective. And by answering questions about what they may or may not do, we can find places where they might struggle. So next slide, please. So these are the personas. Once again, we have Abby, Pat, and Tim. And these 3 personas lie along a spectrum that's defined by their facet values. And so Abby and Tim are the 2 extreme ends of the spectrum, where Pat is in the middle. And so what are these facets? Next, please. The 5 GenderMag facets are how the personas represent a range of users. And these facets are motivations, information processing style, computer self-efficacy, risk averseness, and tech learning style. So the reason we have these particular facets is based in a lot of research and a lot of data from a lot of different studies. And what we find when we're looking at the data is that these facets tend to cluster by gender. So what that means is that, for instance, for risk averseness, more women than men tend to be risk averse, and more men than women tend to be risk tolerant. Now, we're not trying to say that there's a causation that, somebody is risk averse because they're a woman. It's just that when we look at the data that has been collected through studies, it's that the data shows these trends, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later as well. It's also the case that these are on a large spectrum. So Abby and Tim are only the endpoints, and then Pat in the middle, but there's a wide variety between all of them. Next, please. So let's take a look at the Abby persona. So Abby represents the side of the spectrum where there are more women than men. Now, anybody can be Abby, but for now, let's notice that Abby fits into one page and it has these key bullet points for important information. Next, please. So when we look at this persona, anything above this line doesn't really matter that much. Abby can be defined anyway in this background. So above this line, we have the name, age, employer, background, that kind of stuff. And this can all be customized. So Abby could have a different name. Abby could be a different age, have a different job, live in a different place, be a different gender, a different ethnicity, a different sexuality. So really anybody can be Abby. But the important part is the part below this line. So in these 2 red boxes, we have Abby's facets. And we'll take a quick look at them. So for motivations, Abby likes to use technology that is familiar to her and is already comfortable. Then computer self-efficacy. Abby has a lower computer self-efficacy, and if problems arise, tends to blame herself. And just as a side note, for this case, I'm going to define Abby as a woman, but Abby could be any gender. So, side note. But for attitude towards risk, Abby rarely has spare time, so she's risk averse about using unfamiliar technology. Then for information processing style, Abby likes to gather information comprehensively to form a complete understanding of a problem before trying to solve it. And then finally, for learning by process versus tinkering, Abby is a process-oriented learner, so she likes things like tutorials and walkthroughs. And if we were to consider the other side of this spectrum, for example, the risk tolerance side, the side that likes to tinker, that would be the Tim side of the spectrum. Next, please. So we're going to take a look at this particular facet, the attitude towards risk. And again, just to reiterate, Abby's attitude towards risk is that Abby rarely has spare time, so she's risk averse about using unfamiliar technologies that might need her to spend extra time on them. So let's take a look at some of the data behind that. So if we look at this, and unfortunately the study where this data came from only had men and women, so we'll just be looking at those two genders for now. But we can see that these distributions are pretty different. You can see that for women it tends towards the averse side, and for men it tends towards the tolerant side. Next, please. So we can see this reflected in the personas, where we have Abby on the averse side and Tim on the tolerant side. I think there's also a couple more lines to be shown here.
Hey, Rose, do you mind if I just ask, where's that data come from? Is that stuff that Margaret has done, sort of empirical research? Is that drawn from, some other data sources? You know what I mean? Where's the empirical data come from on that? Just out of curiosity.
So, yeah, I believe that this particular data set is from a study that was done in collaboration with, I want to say, Microsoft.
Okay.
And it was a collaboration study, which is why it was a little bit limited in the scope in terms of the number of genders. But there's also some information and citations for this on the gendermag.org
Okay,
website.
awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is the kind of data that we see for these facets, where it tends that more women than men fall on one side and more men than women fall on the other side, with the middle third being represented by Pat. So why does this really matter? Why can't we just, keep developing for Tim? Well, we could. Next, please. But then we'd be leaving out a whole lot of people. And if we take a look at who is in that group, so if we're only developing for risk-tolerant people, then we'd be leaving out these groups of risk-averse, as well as that middle third. And if we look at who's in those groups, we have a large number of women, but also a large number of men, and just people in general. So by developing for both ends of these spectrums, we hit the middle, and we also make things better for everyone, regardless of gender. Next, please. And it's also important to note that these facets depend on individuals and situations. So Gender Mag isn't about saying all men are like this and all women are like that, but putting sort of endpoints to a very variable spectrum. So cognitive styles can occur at both ends or somewhere in the middle. People can be a combination of Abby and Tim, or they can lean towards Tim but have some facets that are similar to Abby. But
let me get rid of this gift from Zoom.
These can also change based on situations and times. So, for example, I tend to be more of a Tim, but if I'm taking my final exam on Canvas and I see that there's a submit button at the bottom, I'm going to be very, very, very risk averse and really careful not to hit that submit button before I want to. So I become a lot more like Abby in that case. And that tends to be the case for a lot of people, is that they have certain situations where they become more like Abby or more like Tim. And a lot of people are a combination of the both.
Hey, I just want to interject. There's a handful of the topics. So you guys, students, if you have questions, this is okay, right, Rose? If they have questions that they want to interject,
Sure.
I mean, we definitely don't want to derail it. And as I said, I already warned you about these folks. But so there's a handful of questions like, to what extent is this about sort of risk aversion bias as opposed to gender bias? And clearly there's this, you can take risk aversion, you can overlay gender, right? And that's kind of a broad question. What would be an example of developing for risk intolerant people? You know what I mean? Anyway, there's some, but I want to just say for the students, I think if you want to jump in and interrupt a little bit, go to the audio. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I will get into some examples in the next couple slides, actually.
Okay.
But the question about this being like more about risk aversion or about cognitive styles than it is about gender, that's a good question, and that's something that we get a lot. And it's a very good point, because these facets, the risk aversion, self-efficacy, tinkering, information processing, those facets don't really have to do with gender when it comes down to it. There's not really a causation between gender and those facets. It's just that when we look at the data, we see certain trends, and it's important to consider the lens of gender when looking at that data.
I would also add that in most of the studies that we use GenderMag, and if you go to the gendermag.org website, you will see that usually we will look at the problems that or the bugs that both genders face, and then after applying GenderMag and fixing that software, we see that actually the gender gap actually is eliminated. That doesn't mean that there are no bugs, but it means that both genders are facing the same problems. Yeah, it's not a causation, but we see the trend, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that another question that I will just address now that I'm sure has come up in somebody's mind is about stereotyping, and if this is really stereotypical and enforces stereotypes, gender stereotypes. And, we had the same question in the lab. So we did run a study about that, bringing in a couple experts on stereotypes in eye tracking to figure out if GenderMag was contributing to stereotypes or had any impact. And we actually found that when people used GenderMag, the personas, they found that stereotyping actually decreased. So that was a really good sign for using GenderMag in this way.
Yeah. Also, when we use GenderMag, we like if you guys noticed, Ross is referencing to Tim's like and Abby's like. So when we use GenderMag, we get rid of that she or he, and we start looking at a specific persona that has no specific ethnicity or gender.
All right. So we'll move on to a couple examples, and maybe this will be a little bit more clear. So this is a web form for Oregon State University that's used to request to add a new course or to change an existing course. So what's highlighted here in the red box, which is the problem, and there's nothing there. And so the problem is that there's nothing there. So when filling out this form originally, there was no indication of how long it would take to fill it out or how much progress had already been made. So if we take the example of Abby, who doesn't like to waste time or doesn't like to use technologies that might take too long. And if Abby doesn't know how much time it's going to take for her to finish this form, and it's, you know, already taken her a long time to get here, or what have you. She or they might not want to complete the form. So the fix for that, next please, is to add a progress bar. And this way, if Abby's on this page, they can see the progress bar and say, oh, well, I'm almost done, so this isn't going to take me too much longer. And they can get a sense of how long it's going to take, or the cost. Next, please.
Well, and I just wanted to say, Rose, to your point, you know, about stereotypes. In that respect, I'm very much Abby, right? In that, like, I'm very pressed for time. I really want to know actually how I'm doing. Am I almost done, right? And at some level, I'll just bail. Like, you are burning way too much of my life, right? And that really kind of just speaks to that idea that the personas have that value, right? To typify a kind of a behavior or a kind of a tendency, you know, behaviorally or attitudinally or what have you, without being pinned to a particular gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great example. So one more example we have is the same form. One of the questions was to select the type of course. So we had undergraduate computer science, undergraduate electrical and computer engineering, and then graduate level course. But what does graduate level course mean? You know, if Abby isn't quite sure, or even if Tim isn't quite sure, then it might be a confusing term. And Tim might click on it because it seems like that's, you know, that might be the right choice if he's thinking of a master's course or something like that. But Abby might be a little bit more skeptical. So what we do to fix that on the next slide is make it more informative, make sure that we're being really clear with what we're saying. It doesn't have to be, you know, a whole paragraph explaining exactly what that label means, but something a little bit more clear. Next. So this is just kind of taking a step back from the gender mag process itself to talk about what gender mag is sort of being used for now. And this is a quote from the founder of Girls Who Code. If women had been more prominently talked about in computing, we literally would not have the lack of women programmers we have today. So next, please. I'll start off just talking a little bit about women in computing. I'm sure you all know, but the number of women in computer science is pretty low.
Wait, what? What? Where do you come up with that? Where does that? Where?
I know,
keep
it's
going.
shocking.
Yeah, keep going. We're all stunned. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sure you've never heard of this before, and it's brand new. But as you can see on the right side, we have this fancy little chart where the red line is women in computer and information science, and it is very low, especially even compared to other STEM fields. But there are problems with retention and stereotype threat, all sorts of problems for women and minority in the classroom. So how can we help? How can Gender Mag help? Next, please. And that is kind of what I'm trying to figure out with my thesis. And I'm working with a couple other people in the lab to figure this out. And what we are asking is, how does teaching Gender Mag impact students' mindsets? Does it make them feel more included? Does it make them want to include others? Are they understanding the material? And so to do this, we are teaching Gender Mag concepts in the Oregon State University Software Engineering online course. So this is in the Oregon State eCampus. And we have a set of sort of streamlined personas, which you can see the Abby persona here on the screen, as well as 9 cognitive style heuristics, which are just some kind of like rules of thumb if you don't know what a heuristic is. But there's an example up here in the upper right-hand corner. We have heuristic number 1, explain what new features do and why they are useful. So it's things like that, and these heuristics are based in research and in the facets. And then we're measuring our questions with a set of questionnaires and assignments to kind of see how students are feeling about these. these topics. Next, please. So for hypotheses and impact, we hypothesize that students who go through the Gender Mag curriculum will create more inclusive designs compared to past terms of the course of software engineering, be more aware of users not like them at the end of the course, report it helped them feel more included, and have increased interest in the CS major after the course. And if these actually are the outcomes of our study, if we're correct in making these hypotheses, then that could be a really big step towards helping underrepresented students see themselves as part of the CS community and as part of the CS education space, as well as helping all students learn inclusive design principles and improve software as a whole as we're sending students out into the world with more knowledge of inclusive design. So I'll hand it back over to Abrar.
Well, sorry, my voice. Okay, so I guess for me is this whole idea that in HCI they're using Gender Mag, and actually Gender Mag is being used for quite some time now, and it showed a great potential. But now we're in kind of like in the middle of like, oh, everything is robotic, and we're stuck at home, so we have robots delivering food to our homes. But then how much of that new field actually, like, it's too new and there are so many things, but we did not incorporate a lot of the well-established HCI stuff into the robotic field. So my thesis is about how can we bring Gender Mag into robotics. Now, this whole idea that Gender Mag works on UI interfaces is proven by now, but then now Margaret is looking at it from an XAI perspective, right? Explainable artificial intelligence, and she's looking at it from an educational perspective, like the work that she's doing with Ross, and with me, she's looking at it from the robotic perspective, right? And here is a quote from a book that I really love. It's called Mismatches by Kate Holmes. And she said that many of these inclusive solutions are actually does not require a lot of dramatic technology innovations. Actually, it's just a simple solution. We've seen it, for example, in that example of that farm. It's just like adding what was it, ECE, and then CS grad level courses was enough for an Abby-like persona. So what makes robotic interfaces kind of different is this whole idea that we have a proximate interaction, right? We don't just have an interface and we will interact with an remotely with a system. We're actually in the same room with that robot or that interface. So we have these robot and their chairs, if you guys can see. So there's a mobile base at the bottom, and then on top of it, we have a chair mounted on it. If you guys can look very closely, and electrical engineering students might understand this, is here we have these capacitive touch sensor. So basically it detects if there was a touch or not, right? So it's like a 1 and 0, right? And if there is a touch, the chair will move. So here in this picture to the right, we see that there's this participant, and she's using her hand, like she's touching the chair, and based on her touches, the chair will move right, left, forward, backward. There was also the ability to select more than one chair at the same time and move them together, which came in handy, but also introduced problems to participants. So in my work, we usually have like user studies, and we bring these chairs and we ask people to basically make an arrangement with them. Now, if we have time, I'm more than happy to show you guys more videos about the study itself. So in the study, we actually had 2 measurements, right? We looked at the problems or the gender bugs that participants faced, and we coded them, and we ended up having 4 problems that overall are the participants faced, regardless of their gender. And then we looked at evidence of their gender MAC facets, right? So we looked at whether if they are Abby's-like or Tim's-like, and we didn't care about their gender. In the study, actually, we did ended up having people who did not believe in gender as a binary thing. We had people who have like gender non-conforming identity. So we didn't care about the gender, and in that study, we only cared about their facets. We looked at their, for example, computer self-efficacy, right? So when a problem happened, when they were trying to arrange the chairs, and then all of a sudden, all the chair moved instead of one of them, did they blame themselves or did they say something against the robots? And I remember this participant, and actually it's a she, it's not a he. And by accident, she touched the select all button, and now all the chairs are moving. And she's like, "Oh my god, these robots are bad!" And I'm like, did you touch the button?" She's like, "Nope, it's the robots." And that was an enough indication for us to know that that participant is a team like, right? We also looked at, do they learn by tinkering, or would they actually follow the tutorials that we gave them? So in the study, we have me actually giving them a tutorial verbally. And while I'm demonstrating the capabilities of the chair and how they can move, some of them started tinkering and didn't care about the tutorials. And some of them actually took their time. They listened to the full tutorial, rehearse, and then they started making the arrangements. So that was enough indication for us to point to their gender mat facets in terms of learning by tinkering or without tinkering. So here is a snippet of the data, and in here we see 12 of the participants. We looked at those who, in terms of computer self-efficacy, we looked at Abby's like and Tim's like, and then we looked at all the problems that they faced. Now we have four type of problems or bugs that they faced. One of them is memory challenging, like having to remember where to touch and what to touch, right? We have all of these touch sensors, they look alike, but then each one of them responds differently. Also, there was the invisible element, right? You have this capacitive touch sensor that tells you nothing about the is this is a button or is this a switch, is this is going to move it forward or backward. Accidental activation happened a lot for most of the participants, actually, because we were using touch sensors. And with touch sensors, like, we touch everything. Right now I'm talking to you guys and I touch myself so many times, right? So and I didn't expect, like, if I'm gonna touch my table, like right now, that the table will move, right? So this whole idea that we touch an object and move actually caused a lot of problems for the participants. And I think there is a typo mistake here, but anyway, so for the accidental activation, we looked at it and we noticed that it was a huge problem for the Abby's like personas and like the Tim like personas. So when we're working on the solution right now, we decided to change the look of the chair, right? So I'm really sorry. This is a picture of the chair from my living room. So forgive that poor picture quality, but we switched from capacitive touch sensors to now we are having those force resisting sensors, right? So basically, we will measure if there is a force, if actually someone pressed on it, pressed on the chair, and actually how strong they pushed on it. So if it's a gentle touch, the chair will never move. Also, we had the ability to switch between an all, select all, or keep using that specific chair. And we also had an on visual indication for on and off. To the right here, we see like a snippet from the mobile interface that we created to come up with more solutions. We noticed that when it comes to arranging chairs, yes, people needed that proximate interaction, but they also expected that remote controlling interface. So we created this mobile interface that allows them to arrange the chairs. And I'm not going to dive deep into it here, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Anyway, the takeaway from our talk today is that this whole idea that maybe your product is not the most significant or the most important product in the user's life. However, for 60 seconds, it's not a chair. It's something that I need to take a seat in front of my peers. And in that sense, please don't shrink it and pink it. Please don't go with a simple solution. Look deep into what makes people Abby's likes and Tim's like, and not be like, oh, you're a typical woman. Let me give you a pink pen and now you will know how to write. Yeah, and in conclusion, I really will encourage you guys to go and watch some of those motivational speakers. I mean, for sure, I'll add my advisor, Margaret Burnett. She will be talking to you about gender inclusivity in software. I mean, can I say no to that? Definitely, And then also Kate Holmes. She's one of the Google UI designer, I believe UX designer at Google, not UI. And then she's also the author of Mismatches, which is a book about inclusive design and how it shapes the technology that we're building today. Michael Kimmel, he's one of those amazing professors in psychology, and he talks about how actually making more inclusive product is actually helpful for both gender and specifically from men perspective. For Michael Neesmith, I highly recommend that you guys watch it because he's one of those people with disability, but he's a UX designer at Amazon. So most of his talks is about how to be able to design for people with different disabilities, how to make universal interfaces that we use them on our daily basis, and we don't know that these small tweaks and changes are actually what makes it usable for everyone.
Hey,
Now,
hey, Abrar, real quick before you move on, do you guys happen to have like handy links to those that maybe one of you could just drop into the chat, and then we can also. These
sure,
are these look like
hyperlinks.
they
Yeah.
look like hyperlinks, yeah.
Yeah, they are hyperlinks. I'll
Even
put
if
it
you
right
could
now.
like, or if like one of you is talking while the other's doing it or something, I don't want to interrupt the flow. And then I can also post these to the syllabus as sort of supplemental, where everybody can kind of get to them.
Yeah, sure. I'll do so.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Actually, we're about to finish. All what I'm gonna say is that if you guys want to know more, you can visit our website gendermag.org. You won't only just learn about GenderMag and the work that we do. You will also, for example, we have this design catalog that will show you examples of small problems and solutions, and how these can help you get over the gender gap. Um, just on a side note, Gender Mag is not like a brand new thing. Gender Mag is being used in 35 countries worldwide, and it's actually used over like 30 states in the US. So it is widely used, and it's a huge community. And if you guys want to learn more about it, just go and visit us there. And now it's time for questions.
All right.
Ross, can you please pull up the links for the talks, please?
Yeah, I stuck them in the.
Yeah,
the
they're
chat.
dropping in. Hey, can we all unmute and give a golf clap? Can we unmute and give a golf clap? This is It works, right? I think it works. We just got done with the Masters tournament. I feel like it works. Yeah. No, thank you so much. And while it's been going by, great golf claps, by the way, everybody. That was fantastic. A lot of really great questions have been rolling by. We kind of have pseudo hard stop at 6:45. That's 5:45 your time. But there were a bunch of really great questions kind of going by. And if anybody wants to, vocalize, this prioritizes to the bold, not the shy, right? So that's, but it's probably one of the best ways to get that out there. Anybody want to go?
Oh, okay, yeah, I have one.
Okay, go Denver.
Okay, so we talked about shrink it and pink it, and I want to know your guys' thoughts about how say a manager or someone suggested that they shrink it and pink it for a product, right? And okay, so shrink it and pink it looks to me like an effort. Someone notices a disparity, right, and is trying to bridge it. And it was suggested that this is a poor take on handling gender disparity, right? What would you suggest? I mean, on the one hand, someone's trying to make an effort. I mean, it's kind of offensive, actually. But on the other hand, someone else might say, no, we're not even going to try to appeal to women because we don't want to get called out and get canceled because they shrinked it and pinked it, right? Could you talk a little about that issue?
Yeah, I can talk about it. After I did my master's, I started working as a UI UX designer, and most of UI UX is about marketing. At the end of the day, right? We do design things, but at the end of the day, we want to sell that product. And shrink it and pink it isn't bad. It is an effort. However, this whole idea of shrink it and pink it will happen if you are working with a team of you and your friends, right? So when you're working with people who look like you and thinks like you, that's when shrink it and pink it happens. And that's why usually, generally, when designing any products, not just technological product, they will have more than group representative people in the team. So basically, you will have a female leader, and you will have I don't know, a queer designer. You will have someone who's an immigrant, or someone who's like me, struggle with English because English is their second language and they're not American, right? So typically, you will have a team with people who represent several groups, and luckily, if you have a lot of them and you encourage them to work, then that's when you will get over the shrink it and pink it overall. Now, when it comes to computer science and technology, there is a Microsoft toolkit that can be helpful. There are a lot of universal design principles that you can use. And then also you can use gender mag. It is widely used to get rid of that gap in terms of technology and how not to shrink it and pink it. Does that answer the question?
My impression was that shrink it and pink it is the examples given, right? There's the Bic pen and the Dell laptop. Yeah. They're a little sorry. They're a little sorry tries at bridging that gap, right?
Yeah.
And as said, at least one of them was a horrible failure because it caused an uproar, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that might dissuade people from trying to bridge the gender disparity, the gender gap?
I'm actually seeing more efforts. Like if Dell laptop happened in 2009, now we're seeing more effort into closing that gap. So I think it didn't disencourage the people. It actually encouraged them to do it correctly.
And the other question I had, Denver, I think it's a great question, right? The first thought I had when you asked it was, well, was Dell and Bic, were they really trying to bridge the gap, or were they? I mean, what does it mean to bridge the gap, right? I mean, they were clearly trying to sell product, and I think that's what businesses exist to do, is to sell products. So good for them in the sense of trying to make an effort, but I don't know if attempting to reach a certain demographic in a blanket kind of way without understanding is itself a bridging of the gap, or simply a lobbing a product over there very naively. Is that bridging the gap, I guess? And maybe it clearly is at some level, and it certainly seems to not be at another level. So even the question of what it means to bridge the gap, I guess, is kind of an open question, right? And that's neither that's not a confirm or deny, Denver, on anything you said or any of the responses. It just raises that question: what does it even mean to bridge the gap? And I think that the end result, I think, of what Rose and Abrar are talking about, and the whole gender mag thing, would actually be to basically sell more product to humans. More, you're going to reach more broadly, which is that initial thing that I can't remember which of you was talking about, the wheelchairs and the cutouts on curbs and whatever, right? The fact that you broaden the impact, right? But that's an interesting question. I don't know. There's no answers in anything I just said. I'm just, exploring.
I didn't present the examples, right? but these were marketing examples, and I think, I mean, one of them was definitely a failure, and I think that speaks to a problem. In my opinion, I
Yeah.
think it speaks to their misunderstanding of what was causing the gap between why men are buying their product and women are not. And it was well, they thought it was just about the palette, and I think that speaks to a deeper problem.
Yeah, I think that I really love your question, Denver, because so the article I read about the Dell laptop is actually Harvard 2009, and it was talking about shrink it and pink it because it's a term that came from marketing perspective. So honestly, it is hard to tell what was the motivation. What was the motivation is to close the gap, or was the motivation is to sell more product? We know that women are 70% of the market. So basically, companies want to sell more to females, right? We know that product like, I don't know, beauty products and cosmetic actually is a profitable industry, right? So ethically, I'm not going to say no if they want to sell more products to more women. Just do it correctly, I guess. Yeah, it is a tough question to answer, but it is a good food for thought.
Yeah, just my observation. I think that I don't think that the marketing team was incompetent. I think the decision happened before it reached the marketing department.
Could be. Any more questions?
Can I ask one more?
Oh, sure.
Just a little different. But there were a few comments in the chat as well. So I think a few people have this. But could you talk a little more about how do you adjust for? Okay, so the slides talked a lot about really a cognitive style bias, I guess, and that is kind of correlated to gender, but not completely. If it were completely, then we would still see more women, I think, in the industry. If it were just cognitive bias explains gender bias. Do you know what I mean?
What's the I think what's the question, Denver?
Okay, the slides talk about what I believe is actually cognitive bias. It's about,
or maybe
it was about,
because Denver and I were actually chatting a little bit about this, right? To what extent is it really at the end of the day? And correct me, Denver, if I'm like misrepresenting anything you're saying, which I always like to do that with you. But if to what extent is there a cognitive bias? There's clearly a demographic overlay that's hardly perfect, right? But there are some tendencies. And to what extent are you really just studying cognitive bias? Is that kind of where we're going,
that's my
Denver?
question.
As
we
opposed
could have
to
a productive conversation about cognitive bias without even mentioning gender.
I mean, like, 'cause if there was like a predominant, if you could describe a predominant, cognitive style of women and a predominant cognitive style of men at a really dominant level, then the mapping would sort of start to fall out. But really, that's not the case, as we've said.
I think it's
right?
worthwhile to talk about cognitive bias,
Yeah.
and it doesn't require bringing in gender to be valuable.
Right.
But,
and so then maybe to what
besides
extent does
that-
it, right?
Besides that, I saw, the biggest disparity in in one of those charts was like 45 to 25 between the genders, and the disparity in our field is 80 to 20 at best. So that's quite a bit different. That's not, they're not the same, definitely.
Mhm.
I just wonder why is cognitive bias and gender bias, why do they have to be part of the same discussion, and do they have value on their own?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. So this is a question that I get a lot. I do a lot of trainings for Gender Mag, teaching the Gender Mag process to IT professionals at Oregon State. And they ask a lot of these same questions. like, why aren't we just talking about this in terms of cognitive styles? Why can't we just call this, cognitive styles inclusiveness?
Cognomag.
Yeah.
Right.
And it is the case that we can frame all of this in terms of cognitive styles. And actually, that's one of the things that we've done in the work that I do for my thesis, is calling them cognitive style heuristics as opposed to gender mag heuristics. And sometimes that can make it a little bit easier in terms of talking about it, because gender can be hard to talk about. But it's also the case that framing it as gender mag it's been found to reduce stereotyping, and also it can make kind of a more comfortable space for minorities, especially women, to open up the conversation and have a way to talk about gender where you're not making it about yourself. So it's a little bit more comfortable to open up about. But at the end of the day, it really is cognitive styles, and we're just looking at it through the lens of gender to sort of get these insights. And it's the case that if you isolate Abby and Abby's facets as just a particular cognitive style, and you are developing for Abby, then you're still having a similar impact where you're making software better for women, but that's because of the data that we see that they do cluster by gender, these facets. But it's hard to say if one is better than the other, talking about gender mag or just talking about cognitive styles.
Right. And to me, the overlap, and again, I'm just, sharing thoughts, I guess. But when I look at, like Denver brought up, the disparity, it's, in my experience, I've been a professor for 20 years or so, it's kind of 80-20, 90-10, right? That's sort of a gender disparity in computer science. As a something that people study, one of my daughters was a CS major for a while. And I've just had, friends and associates, and they've reported to me a weird kind of tremendous male/nerd, right? As the sort of the two main kind of collective demographics, right? You don't have to be a man to be a nerd. You know what I mean? You can be a woman to be a nerd, but there is kind of this, but in computer science in particular, there's kind of a very strong man nerd thing. And then there's this sort of a byproduct. And to me, when you talk about the differences that Denver was pointing out from your slides, they're there, and empirically they show up. Then you get to this like 80-20, 90-10 disparity, which I think, to me, there's just, I can't reconcile that with any sort of natural predisposition ideas, even nature versus nurture. I just think that I had friends, okay, I remember having a really great friend as an undergrad, and this guy was a vocalist, musician, ballroom dancer who was a CS undergrad. And he almost left the major, he was a guy, you know what I mean? He was just a straight guy, but he almost left the major because the nerd factor was so overpowering. I remember one day just sitting in class and him just fuming, just pissed. I'm like, Todd, dude, what's up? He's like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore, right? And this guy was just being driven out of the major by the geek factor, right? And I'm just saying, I think there's some bunch of amplifiers that create, in my view, and I don't have the data to show this, and I'm a big believer in empiricism, but my gut says that does not explain an 80-20, 90-10 disparity, and I think we're losing out. I think as a field we're losing out in every respect. So somehow they converge. End of speech for me, but it feels like they converge to me, which is why this topic is so important to me. One of the reasons why it's so important to me. End of soliloquy. You may respond, rebut, agree, disagree. It's all good.
Hey, if I could, I have a question. So we're talking about this maybe 90-10 disparity, 80-20 disparity. does that hold up cross culturally? Like in Europe, in Asia, like does that show up everywhere?
It's not global. It's U.S. It's Western, more specifically.
Is that what's your sense of Brian Rose?
I think, see, for me, I think I'm seeing gender mag being used nationwide. So I see that trend happening. Like when I look at data by gender, I see that different. But then I remember the first time I started working with Margaret, my first question was for her was like, is this about gender or not about gender and cognitive styles? And I remember her answer for me, it is about gender, but because you're magnifying it and looking deep into what separates each gender from a cognitive perspective, because the cognitive aspect is what comes into the idea of solving problem using technology, then that's why it is about cognitive and it is about gender, but not about gender. Also, this whole idea that gender isn't binary, right? So now we have a method that allow us to not only see gender from a binary perspective and just look at the cognitive styles that initially in psychology they used to separate us as women and men, and now they're actually uniting us as a wide spectrum of genders with different cognitive styles. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, I think let me try to clarify, because I thought what I thought Tyler was asking was, if you, I'll try to maybe make it more of a succinct, direct question. If you go to Asia and maybe even different countries within Asia, do you still see that 80-20-90-10 disparity, say, in just what the demographics are for CS majors? If you go to Europe, right? If you go to Africa, if you go to the Middle East, you know what I mean? Do you see, is that, Tyler, is that kind of part of where you were going? And that's only one aspect. Right. I mean, enrollments in CS is only one aspect, but I think it's a very telling aspect, right? Because, there's a lot of code that's built by engineers for engineers, right? But a lot of code by men for men as well, right? Implicitly, it's what you create. You create what you're like if you don't stop and think about it, right? But does the data show that the kind of disparity in the U.S. is the same worldwide, or does it vary from culture to culture? And do you even know if that, what that data says?
Well, I can only speak about the Middle East because I'm Black Arab, right? So I that part of the world, yes, I see that disparity, right? I remember when I was doing my undergrad, there was only one school for women, right? And then all our teachers were male, right? All the professors, we didn't have any female faculty. And then, except of the head of the department, and her major was mathematics. Like they couldn't find any female to hire. And then, at the same time, they couldn't even open an ECE department for females just because there wasn't enough enrollment. So I know the data there, and I've seen it, experienced it, but I'm not really sure about the rest of the world. That's I don't know. I'll Google it.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great. Kind of off topic. Off class, and we have some discussions that continue. I think it'd be a very interesting question. Denver just posted a story at Wikipedia on article on gender disparity in computing, right? Which with a statement that Saudi Arabian computer scientists are 59% women. I didn't see that coming. And right, but what is, and I'm a big, and I'm an empiricist, right? So I'm always a big fan of let's figure out what the data says, right? And the more of that, the better. And the other interesting thing is for some of these students that might be interested in doing research in this space, this is also a bit of a teaser for that. What are the cool research? There's so much there. My empirical researcher brain is on overload, when you start talking about all this stuff. Do we have any last kind of, we're really close on time. We're actually over time. That's how close we are. We're over. But are there any just like last shot? You're just dying to, to lob a question out before we wrap. Anybody? Bueller? Well, I think we're good, right? And if there's some others, if you want to just stick around, if there's anybody wants to pick the brain of Rose or Abrar, I'm sure they're in the chat, so you can jump in there or continue it. So anyway, so I think we all want to just thank you for taking the time, for the effort, for the research. I think it's been just absolutely fabulous. You've been great presenters, great guests, and I love that I don't have to lecture or talk about, I don't have to prep anything, which is just fantastic. So, but no, thank you so much for everything, for being here and for doing that.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you.
Should we send them off with a golf clap? Should we unmute and give them a little golf clap out the door?
Yeah.
Is the golf?
Thank you very much.
It's pitiful. That was a pitiful golf clap. Come on.
Thank you.
You can do better than that. All right. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. I'm going to take down the Zoom. But again, if anybody wants to grab them before they go, this would be your opportunity. And Rose and Abrar, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time and for being here and sharing the insight and for the work you're doing and the research and everything else. And tell Margaret I love her and hope she's doing great.
She is.
And to not retire before you guys finish your research. That's critical. So. Alrighty, okay. I'm going to take down Zoom now, and I'll leave. But we'll leave. The audio will still be up. So.
Okay.
And last shot for anybody if you wanna hit them on the way out. Otherwise, we're good.
I loved the topic. Thank you.
Sure. I love having to present about gender mag. It's one of those things that I love to talk about. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. You're very welcome. Okay, I'm gonna shut it down. I'm gonna shut down the YouTube stream.